Greetings, Intro students. This will be a complete solution to game challenge number 3. In game challenge number 3, we wanted to have a ball object that changes speed whenever you hit the space bar. So I'm going to take my large problem and I'm just going to start by doing the simplest thing I can do and adding things incrementally until I get to what I want it to look like. So I'm going to start by just having it have a ball object that moves around. Alright, so I know I'll need to draw an ellipse, and I'll just draw it at a fixed location for right now. Okay, if I run this, I should just see, yep, it's sitting there. Alright, well, if I want the ball to move around, I know these two numbers tell me where the center of the ball is supposed to draw. So if the ball is supposed to move, I need the position I'm drawing it at to move, which means these numbers need to change. The only way those numbers are going to change while the program is running is if I save them into variables. So I'll create an XY variable. Remember, I declare all variables above setup, and then I give them their starting values inside setup. So now instead of drawing at 300, 300, I'll draw at XY. If I want these two numbers to change as my program's running, I need to actually put a line of code that will change their values. So as you can see, now when I run the program, I'm adding 1 to X and 1 to Y, which is producing a downward motion to the right. Let's add some code that will make it wrap around the screen when it gets to the edges. So I'm going to have 4 if statements to test if the ball has hit each of the different edges of the screen. So I'm going to test the right-hand side of the screen first. I know the ball has gone off the right-hand side of the screen if the x-coordinate is larger than 600. If the x-coordinate is larger than 600, I want to set the x-coordinate back to 0, because 0 is the left-hand side of the screen. So the way you would think about this in English is if x-coordinate is off the right side of the screen, then set x to be the left side of the screen. Okay, so that's one if statement. Let's do now testing if it's off the left side of the screen. If it's off the left side of the screen, x will be smaller than 0. And if that happens, I want it to loop back around to the right, so I should set x to be 600. Alright, let's add 2 more statements. I'm going to test to see if it has gone off the bottom of the screen. If I'm testing for the bottom of the screen, I know that's the y variable now, so I need to see if y is larger than 600. And if it is, I can set it to 0. If y is less than 0, it must have gone off the top of the screen, so I can set y to be 600. Okay, this is all taking up a lot of space. I mentioned in class that if you only have a single line of Java inside your if statement, you don't need to create a block of code with these braces. It's actually completely safe, to do this. I can just have it all on one line. So if this is true, it will do that single line. Let's just make that change right now with all of these, because I think it makes it look nicer. Alright, I'm going to keep writing my comments here so I remember what I'm doing. So this draws the ball. These 2 lines of code will move the ball. And this wraps the ball around the screen. Alright, so far so good. So when I hit the keyboard, I want the ball to change its motion. I don't want it to change its position, I just want its speed to change. So the question is, what in here is determining the speed of the ball? You know that speed is the rate at which the position changes. So here's where I'm actually changing the position. This up here just draws it at these 2 numbers, which are the position. But this line doesn't actually move the ball. The ball only moves if these 2 numbers change, and that happens right here. Alright, so how are these position numbers changing? They're changing by this much. I'm adding 1 to x every time through the loop. So if I made this 5, it should go faster horizontally because I'm adding 5 every time instead of 1 every time. So the speed at which it's going is determined by these two numbers. So remember before when we were always drawing the ellipse at 300, 300, and we decided that if the ellipse was going to move, I needed to change these numbers while the program was running. And the only way to have these two numbers change is by putting them inside variables, so that way we can change the value of the variables. The exact same thing is happening here. 5, that's the speed, and I want that to change. If I type 10, and if I change it just by hand right now, I have to restart the whole program for the ball's motion to change. So instead, let's make this a variable, which I'll call x speed, and this is a variable called y speed. I need to create these variables, of course, but what will happen now is if x speed is 2, every time I go through this loop, I'll be adding 2 to the position. So you'd say, like, my speed is 2. Okay, what if I want my ball to speed up? If I wanted it to speed up, I would just set this variable to be a different number, and then I'd be using a different number to add to my position. So that would effectively change the speed. All right, let's create these two variables. Just like we always do, we will create, I want to make them integers. We will create x speed and y speed up here, and then I give them their starting values inside setup. So I want x speed to be 1, and I want y speed to be 0. All right, let's run it. So y speed is 0. That makes sense. It's not going up and down at all. X speed is 1, so that looks like it's working. So now all I need to do is figure out how to change these two values when they hit the spacebar. So I'll say if key pressed, which is my way of saying, are they hitting any key at all? Then I want to see if they're hitting a key, is the key equal to the space key? All right, if it's equal to the space key, oops, double equals, if the key they're hitting is actually the space bar, I can do whatever I want it to do in here. So if I wanted to change color, I would set the color in here. If I wanted it to, let's say I wanted to warp back to the middle of the screen. If I wanted to warp back to the middle of the screen, I could just set x and y back to 300 here. Because remember, x and y, that's where we're going to draw the position of the ball. So if I want to warp the ball somewhere, all I've got to do is set those two numbers. So now whenever I press space, it warps back to the middle. Okay, what I want to do is reset the speed. I could do something like this, x speed equals x speed plus 1. What this is going to do is every time I hit space, it's going to make the speed a little bit faster. So as you see, each time I hit space, the ball is going faster and faster and faster in the x direction. Well, I don't want to increase the speed. I want to reset it to be something random. So let's do this. Let's say -6 plus math.random times 13. What's this doing? The largest thing this part in the highlighting can be is 12. And the smallest thing it can be is 0. So let's imagine it's the smallest thing it can be. If this random thing is as small as possible, I'll have 0 minus 6, so the x speed will be -6. So that's the smallest possible x speed, -6. If this is as large as possible, I'll have 12 minus 6 is 6. So that means the x speed will be +6, which is the largest it can ever be. So the idea here is I'm starting at the smallest value I want it to have, and then I'm adding a number between 0 and whatever number will take me to the largest speed I want it to have. So this expression will now generate a random speed between -6 and +6. I want to do the same exact thing for the y speed. So now, every time I hit spacebar, I'm generating 2 new random speeds. And when it loops back up to the top of draw, I'm using those 2 new numbers to add into the position. So let's see if it works. I press space, and it's going in a new random direction. Great, so that seems to be working. Okay, so now the challenges say that... Nope, that's today's challenges. I think the challenge said we want 2 different balls to be doing this. You don't know how to make objects yet, and you don't know about arrays yet, and both of those would be better approaches to this, and we'll get to those later in the year. For now, if you want a second ball object, you need all of the same variables that describe the first ball. So a ball needs an XY center, and it needs a speed. So if I'm going to make a second ball, I'll need a second X and Y, and I will need a second X speed and Y speed. And all of those variables will need to get set up in setup. I'm going to start the second ball in a slightly different place, and I'm going to have it be moving differently to start with, so that way we can see it. And then down in here, I'm going to think about each different thing and think, do I need to repeat this thing? All right, this draws the ball. Do I need to repeat that? Yes, because I need to draw the second ball, but I want it to be at the second ball's location. All right, this is moving the first ball. I'll need to move the second ball also, so I want to reset x2 and y2 because those are the position variables for the second ball. And I want them to be whatever they used to be plus the x speed and y speed of the second ball. If I left these as x speed and y speed, now it's like I'm using a single speed to control both ball objects. So they might have different positions, but I'm changing their positions by the same amount, so they'd both be going the same speed. Alright, I want the second ball to wrap around the screen, so I'll add a whole second copy of all of these. And remember to update all your variables so they're talking about the second ball and not the first ball. And finally, when I hit key pressed, well, I don't need to copy all of this. This doesn't really make any sense because if I'm checking if key is pressed up here and I'm checking if it's the space key, I want everything that I want it to do when I press the space key to happen just inside this test. I don't want to have a separate test down here to see if I'm hitting space. So instead of having all of that, I'm going to do two different things inside this test to see if the keyboard is the space key. I'm going to set the speed of the first ball, and I'm also going to set the speed of the second ball. And that seems nice and organized. So let's run it. Cool, when I hit the space, yep, it looks like they're changing random directions. So that is now a complete working version of number 2. Enjoy!